Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're going to lie back, relax, and tiptoe into a royal history that gets a little too close for comfort. Picture this. The night is warm. A breeze brushes your curtain ever so lightly, and in the distance, a fan hums softly. But somewhere far off in time, under a pale desert moon, a young man is nervously slipping a golden ring onto the finger of his sister. And no, you're not going to survive this family tree. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere unique, post your location and local time down in the comments. I read every single one. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise. And let's get started on tonight's journey together. You shuffle quietly through a long, sun-scorched corridor of time and stop before an entrance carved into stone. Sand piles up in the corners. You duck your head and step inside the limestone belly of an ancient Egyptian temple. It's dim, dry, and smells faintly of dust and frankincense. Somewhere nearby, a priest murmurs a blessing in a dead language, and on a polished stone floor, the royal family of Egypt, draped in linen, gold, and quiet ambition, celebrates another holy wedding. The groom is the pharaoh, and the bride is his sister. This wasn't scandalous. This was normal. In fact, if he didn't marry her, people would have asked questions. After all, this was Egypt, around 1400 BCE. Give or take 100 years, a crocodile and a pyramid. And in this land, the blood of the gods was thought to flow through the veins of the royal family, diluting that divine blood with a non-royal unthinkable marrying outside the family. Dangerous. You might as well pour wine into holy water. So, instead, they kept it in the family, and then kept it there again and again. Take Pharaoh Akhenaten. He married Nefertiti, yes, but also one of his daughters, maybe two. Historians still debate whether one of those daughters also gave birth to his successor, the famous boy king Tutankhamun, who, by the way, also married his half-sister. That's the family version of re-gifting wedding rings. Now, if you're wondering what this does to a gene pool, after a few centuries of swirling in its own juices, well, Tutankhamun offers a pretty grim answer. CT scans of his mummy suggest he had a clubfoot, a cleft palate, and possibly a bone disease. He also died at 19, probably not just from a curse, unless that curse was called recessive alleles. And yet, even with all that, it wasn't weird to them. It was sacred. The gods had married their siblings. Isis and Osiris were brother and sister, and husband and wife. So, Egyptian royalty followed suit. You were imitating divine perfection, or at least giving it a good try. The walls of this temple are covered in scenes of Jund with eagle heads, crocodile jaws, and wives that double as sisters. It all makes sense if you squint hard enough, and if you grew up in that world. You didn't question it. You believed your blood was special. You were a walking miracle with eyeliner, and if you had to marry your sister to stay that way, well, maybe love is patient, kind, and extremely genetically risky. There's a lesser-known oddity about all this. Some Egyptologists believe that royal children may not have called their mother mother in public. Instead, the pharaoh might present his wife-sister as the great royal wife, and the child might refer to her with ceremonial titles, but never anything as mundane as mom. Historians still debate whether this practice was a show of reverence or an attempt to avoid awkward dinner conversations. Pass the dates. Sister, mother. You wonder what it was like to grow up in that palace. Marble floors, wide courtyards, servants folding and refolding linen robes, and somewhere in the corner, your cousin plotting to marry you or assassinate you, often both. Of course, this isn't unique to Egypt, but Egypt gave the whole world its first structured system of dynastic inbreeding. They turned cousin marriage into state policy, cloaked it in spiritual necessity, and built some of the largest structures in human history, while also passing down a royal chin. So fragile, it probably came with a warning label, and yet the statues remain tall, poised, immortal. Queen Tia, regal in her carved headpiece, Amenhotep III, staring ahead with deadpan eyes and maybe 3 cousins for parents. You wonder if they ever paused between diplomatic ceremonies and thought, maybe we should branch out a little. But no, because power was in the blood, and blood had to stay pure. So you step back out into the sand. The sun hits your face like a slap made of light. You shield your eyes, take one last look at the towering columns, and walk toward the next civilization, still rubbing the faint chill of a royal wedding ring off your imagination. You wander westward now, away from the sand-drenched silence of Egypt, and into the olive-scented air of ancient Greece. The wind here feels a little cooler, a little more philosophical, as if it's just spent the afternoon debating ethics under a fig tree. Marble columns rise like frozen waterfalls around you. Somewhere nearby, a lyre plucks a slow, thoughtful tune, and the sun glints off bronze armor and sweaty brows. But behind all the rhetoric, behind the poetry and democracy, there's something familiar, that same royal instinct to keep power in the family. In Greece, the gods were always watching, and unfortunately, the gods were also terrible role models. Zeus married his sister. Hera, though married, is generous. His actual hobby was transforming into various animals to seduce mortal women. Historians still debate whether his form as a golden shower was meant to be poetic or just deeply unsettling. But the point is, if your gods were family, marrying chaos goblins, then royal blood, mixing with royal blood, felt downright respectable. You weren't just marrying your cousin. You were preserving a divine legacy. Take the Ptolemies. Technically, they were Greek Macedonian descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals and ruled Egypt after his death. But they kept many Egyptian traditions, and yes, that included sibling marriage. Again, we're really 2 for 2 now. You walk past a mosaic depicting Ptolemy II and his sister wife, Arsinoe, who was first married to another king before she returned home, married her brother, and became a goddess. That's not a family reunion. It's a career move. The Greeks called it Theos Philadelphos, the sibling-loving gods. It wasn't just PR. This stuff had real political logic. In the Hellenistic world, rival dynasties were always watching, always plotting. Marrying within the family created loyalty, clarity, and fewer awkward in-laws. Your wife wouldn't bring her uncle's army to dinner because your wife was your sister. The Ptolemaic dynasty doubled down on this. Cousins, siblings, even the occasional niece made their way into the wedding chamber. You might think this would lead to disaster, and you'd be right, but not just yet. What's interesting is that, unlike Egypt, mainland Greek dynasties talked around the incest a little more. There was a kind of polite, we know, but let's not get into the details air to it. After all, many Greek city-states weren't monarchies. Power had to be justified in cultural terms, so they leaned on divine heritage, mythic symbolism, and the always convenient idea that our ancestors did it, so we should too. You sit at the edge of an agora, watching a young nobleman nervously recite a speech to a bored teacher. The boy will probably grow up, join the army, and eventually get married. Statistically, there's a good chance that wife will be related to him by blood, possibly through both parents. Family trees here look more like family wreaths. Here's a strange fact for you. In Sparta, which was famously militaristic and intense, cousin marriage was actually encouraged. The idea was that Spartan blood was superior and worth concentrating. You weren't supposed to marry for love. You were supposed to marry for the state. The idea of marrying a stranger for romance would have gotten you about as far as skipping spear practice to write poetry. Historians still debate whether this created more loyalty or more awkward dinners. There's one record of a Spartan woman who was married to her half-brother and complained that he left her home to go to war too often, not because she missed him, because he wasn't producing enough sons. Priorities. And yet, even with all this, the Greeks knew the risks. They weren't blind to it. The philosopher Aristotle noted that the children of closely related parents often turn out poorly. But as with all things royal, advice was easier to give than to follow. You imagine sitting across from one of these dynastic couples at a banquet. The food is rich lamb, olives, honey cakes. The conversation is stiff, and the resemblance between husband and wife is striking. They both have the same sharp nose, the same chin, the same dead eyes. They toast to Aphrodite and Apollo, and you sip your wine slowly, thinking, how did nobody stop this? But it wasn't about stopping. It was about preserving, about legacy, about wrapping power in the silk of familiarity. So you rise, brush crumbs from your robe, and step out into the colonnade. The cicadas hum gently in the distance. You pass a statue of Zeus holding a thunderbolt, Hera by his side, her expression equal parts bored and furious. And you keep walking toward a brighter shore, where Greek ideals would mix with Egyptian habits, because next up, Cleopatra, you walk now toward the sea. The whips of the Mediterranean slap gently against worn stone docks, and you can smell the salt in the air, mingled with resmen and politics. Alexandria rises in the distance, opulent, learned, and quietly cracking under the weight of its own tangled family roots. You've arrived in the age of the Ptolemies again, but this time everything's more intense. This isn't just Greek philosophy brushing up against Egyptian ritual. This is the full collision. The library is burning, the politics are boiling, and Cleopatra is getting married. To her brother. Again, if this is starting to feel like a rerun, well, you're not wrong. The Ptolemaic dynasty took incestuous marriage and made it their brand. From Ptolemy I to Cleopatra VII, nearly every generation tied the knot within the family. They weren't being subtle about it either. Coins, statues, temple inscriptions, all proudly displayed, husband and wife, siblings, like it was the hottest trend. When Cleopatra's father died, she co-ruled with her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy I. The marriage was more of a formality than a romance. You can almost imagine her adjusting her crown, sighing heavily, and saying, "I suppose we're doing this again." Historians still debate whether they ever shared a bed or just a throne, but the symbolism was clear. To rule Egypt meant embodying the old gods, Osiris and Isis, reborn in every generation. So Cleopatra became Isis incarnate, and her brother, well, he played the part until she had him. Drones, the Nile, sibling squabbles, Ptolemaic edition, the next brother husband. Ptolemy XIV didn't last much longer. Cleopatra eventually ruled with her son, Caesarion, whose father was Julius Caesar, breaking the family pattern in favor of something a little more Roman and a lot more ambitious. But let's talk about Caesarion. He was the product of Cleopatra stepping outside her usual dating pool, a Roman father, an Egyptian Greek mother, and no idea what fate had in store for him. Spoiler, not a long reign. Octavian, later, Augustus, had him quietly removed from the line of succession with a sword. The Roman kind of family planning. And yet, the most fascinating part of this tangled bloodline isn't just the frequency, it's the precision. Cleopatra and her ancestors didn't marry their siblings by accident. They did it to avoid civil war, to block rivals, to anchor legitimacy in a story as old as the pyramids. If you trace Cleopatra's family tree, it loops around so tightly it nearly becomes a circle. One odd fact: many Ptolemies reused names obsessively. There are at least 15 Cleopatras, numerous Ptolemies, and enough Arsenos to fill a Roman census. Keeping track of who married whom is like playing royal Sudoku on nightmare mode. Some historians have actual spreadsheets devoted to sorting it all out, and even they argue about it. And then there's the question of how the public reacted. Did everyday Egyptians cheer these unions, grumble about them in fish markets? Historians still debate whether these marriages were accepted as divine duty or quietly mocked behind palace walls. Some suggest that while the elite priests and nobles went along with it, regular folks rolled their eyes and got on with life. Imagine you're a shopkeeper in Alexandria. You've got figs to sell, debts to pay, and now your queen has married her baby brother. Again, you sigh, flip your awning down, and mutter, "At least she speaks Egyptian," because Cleopatra was unique that way. One of the few Ptolemies who bothered to learn the language of the people. That bought her some favor. Even if the family tree made the average olive branch look refreshingly straightforward, you lean against a pillar and try to picture the royal dinner table. Cleopatra, stunning and sharp, her half-grown husband brother beside her, trying not to spill wine on his tunic. Advisors standing just outside the curtain, whispering alliances and betrayals in Greek and Egyptian. The tension is thick. The bloodline is thicker. It's not romantic. It's chess, and every pawn is also your cousin. Eventually, you realize Cleopatra didn't just inherit power. She inherited a dynasty, obsessed with folding itself inward. And yet, she tried to play the wider board. Rome, Caesar, Antony. Those weren't just lovers. They were escape routes. But history, as you know, rarely lets you exit quietly. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended with Cleopatra's death. With her, the ancient world's most famous experiment in sibling sovereignty finally unraveled, and Rome took over. No more divine marriages, just imperial senators stabbing each other in the back, the old-fashioned way. You leave Alexandria behind now, the sea brushing your ankles as you step away from the shore. The sun is lower, the wind is cooler, and ahead lies the next great empire, where emperors are beginning to wonder if marrying your niece might be even more efficient than marrying your sister. You enter Rome through a triumphal arch. Sunlight slanting through its carved columns, like it's trying to remind you this city is a monument to ambition. The streets are paved, the aqueducts hum quietly with flowing water, and somewhere nearby, someone's being poisoned politely. This is not a city built on cousinly warmth, but don't let the marble fool you. Rome had its own tangled web of familial politics, and oh yes, it tangled deep. At first glance, Rome seems almost allergic to dynasties. The Republic prided itself on shared power, on checks and balances, and on making sure no single family ruled too long. But then, Julius Caesar happened, and the idea of one man holding absolute authority started to look, well, convenient, especially if you were that man, or his great-nephew. Enter Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. He didn't just inherit power. He married it, adopted it, and then married it again. Literally, his marriage to Livia wasn't incestuous, but his long-term political strategy, it makes your head spin. He married off his daughter, Julia, to a man she didn't like, then her daughter to another, and so on. each match crafted like origami, folded with precision, destined to collapse if one piece was out of place. But things got truly personal under the later emperors. Take Claudius, often mocked for his limp and stutter. He was overlooked for years, until he accidentally became emperor after the Praetorian Guard killed his predecessor and shoved him onto the throne. He was smart, bookish, and unexpectedly ruthless, and one of his best-known acts, he married his niece, Agrippina the Younger. Wasn't just any niece. She was ambitious, cunning, and very possibly the real power behind the throne. Their marriage was technically illegal under Roman law at the time, so Claudius changed the law. Easy fix. Historians still debate whether he did it out of genuine love, political necessity, or pure manipulation on Agrippina's part. Whatever the reason, it worked. Agrippina's son from a previous marriage. Young Nero was soon adopted as Claudius's heir, neatly eliminating any rivals, neatly setting up one of the most infamous reigns in Roman history. And Claudius, well, he died not long after, probably poisoned by Agrippina, allegedly with mushrooms, though some sources say it was feather-tickled poison served in a bowl of porridge. Romans were oddly creative with murder, like Martha Stewart. But for dynastic betrayal, you sit in a Roman villa now, the mosaic under your feet, cool and geometric. Around you, noble families are scheming in multiple tenses. A daughter's marriage to a cousin here, an uncle adopting a nephew there. It's not just about who's related. It's about who can be maneuvered into loyalty. The closer the blood, the harder it is to rebel without making dinner awkward. One odd fact: Roman aristocrats sometimes used family portraits, painted wax masks of ancestors during funeral processions. They'd parade them through the streets to show off just how many powerful relatives they had. A literal flex of lineage. And if some of those ancestors were also in-laws, well, no one said power came with a clean family tree. As Nero came to power, that tree became more of a tumbleweed. His mother, Agrippina, thought she could control him. He thought otherwise. Their relationship soured fast. One day, he tried to kill her by collapsing her boat. She swam back to shore, so he sent a few men to finish the job. You shake your head. It's hard to know where the family ends and the throne begins. Every name echoes, every bond frays under the weight of succession. Rome wasn't unique in using marriage to secure power, but they added a layer of irony, cruelty, and theatrical flair. These weren't quiet royal unions. They were scandals, tragedies, plays written in real time with very real daggers. And yet, you almost admire the audacity. You picture a Senate meeting where a man stands up and says, "I'm marrying my niece. Don't worry. It's for the empire." And everyone nods slowly. Because at that point, what else are you going to say? Eventually, the bloodlines of the Julio-Claudian dynasty got too twisted to sustain. Nero's rule ended with rebellion, suicide, and the usual parade of statues being pulled down. The Roman world moved on, but the pattern had been set. Family was power. And if that meant marrying the girl who used to sit next to you at family banquets, then so be it. At least she wouldn't plot against you. Probably you leave Rome through a dusty colonnade, sandals scuffing ancient stone behind you. An empire hums on, stitched together by ambition and names that repeat like echoing ghosts. Ahead, darker castles, damper dungeons, and a medieval Europe where blood was a crown and kinship a chessboard. You walk now beneath a sky smudged with mist, where the scent of damp wood smoke clings to your cloak, and every distant bell toll sounds like a warning. You've arrived in medieval Europe. It's colder here physically, yes, but also emotionally. Castles loom instead of temples, and power doesn't wear gold leaf. It wears iron and chainmail, and inside these thick-walled keeps, kings and queens lean close to their family trees. Not for comfort, but for strategy, because here, marrying your cousin wasn't just a tradition. It was a requirement. You shuffle past a long dining hall where a dozen nobles chew venison in silence, each one mentally mapping out alliances, dowries, and unspoken claims to distant thrones. The medieval world was a patchwork of principalities and duchies, each clinging to its little bit of inherited land, and the easiest way to not go to war over that land: marry someone who already has a claim to it. But that someone was usually your cousin. Let's start with Charlemagne. You know, the guy they called the Father of Europe. He had multiple wives and numerous concubines, and made sure his sons married within the Frankish noble class. His descendants, the Carolingians, intermarried to keep their authority consolidated. And before long, everyone in that dynasty was related to everyone else by blood, marriage, or both. Usually both. You sit in a chilly chapel now, watching a wedding where neither bride nor groom looks particularly happy. They mumble vows in Latin while glancing at the same bishop who baptized them both as infants. Cousins. Marrying cousins wasn't scandal. It was logistics. You had to keep your lands from falling into enemy hands, and an outsider, well, they might want your lenda. One odd fact: the church actually tried to stop this starting in the 9th century. The Catholic Church expanded the degrees of prohibited kinship at one point, banning marriage within 7 degrees of relation. That's your 4th cousin. By that standard, most of Europe would have been single forever. Historians still debate whether this policy was genuinely moral or just a clever way for the church to gain control over noble unions. But naturally, loopholes appeared like mushrooms after rain. Kings and queens sent envoys to Rome for dispensations, special permissions to marry within the forbidden range. It became almost routine. Yes, Your Holiness, we're cousins, but it's for the stability of the realm, and with enough old and influence. The Pope usually agreed. You move now through the cold corridors of the Capetian dynasty in France. Hugh Capet started a line that would rule for generations, and nearly all his descendants married within the same extended aristocratic network. It was like European royalty had subscribed to a very exclusive dating app called Only Bloodlines. So, in England, things weren't much better. William the Conqueror married Matilda of Flanders, his cousin once removed, and most of their descendants kept up the family tradition. By the time the Plantagenets rolled in, the genetic loops were practically humming. You stop briefly at the wedding of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II, a political powerhouse match. Eleanor had previously been married to the King of France, also a cousin, naturally, but that